Hi there everyone, welcome back to Dandelion Delphi tutorials. Today we're going to look at the OOP question of the Supplementary of 2018, completing the object class. That would be question 2.1. So before we start, we always have a look at what is given in question, in this case 2.1, but in your exam it will be question 3.1, your OOP question. This is the description of the T star object holding the values of a star. There's a name, magnitude. Here we can see an example, so that would be real. Distance, so this looks like it is an integer. And then constellation name, that would be string. And then the navigational status, which is Boolean. So now it is your turn to practice. Press pause and try the constructor method in question 2.1.1 yourself. You will note that this constructor is receiving values. Make sure that you only have the number of parameters as indicated in the question and no more and no less. So we can see we have the name, the magnitude, the distance from the Earth, and the constellation. So that would be 4 parameters, which needs to be set to the respective attributes. And then we also need to initialize the F navigational status to false. So here is my signature for my constructor with the name of the constellation. I have them both there as strings. The magnitude is real and the distance as integers. And the way I determined my data types here is by looking at the attributes they are going to give values to. So you can see that the magnitude is real, the distance is integer, and then the constellation, the name are both strings. Just a reminder, when you create your constructor, your fields, starting with F, first in the alphabet, and also F for first, will go on the left of your assignment statement. If you swap them around with your parameters, they will have no values, and this whole question, which will count 40 marks at the end of this year, will then not have any output. So make sure that you remember your fields go first, and your parameters are the ones giving values to your field, so they go on the right. And then just a reminder to set your navigational status field to false. Now press pause again and try the accessor method in question 2.1.2. Just remember, an accessor method means it's a function and it will always be public. I also don't see it receiving any values, and accessor methods usually don't receive values. So here is my accessor method, the function getConstellation. It returns a string data type because it's going to return the name of the constellation, which is also a string data type. And our accessor methods usually just look like this, where we have result is assigned to the field name on the right. You will see that as part of the given code, there were some signatures provided, but they never completed those accessor methods. So if you push Ctrl-Shift-C the first time for get constellation, you'll see they will open up, but just ignore them for now. So here is your turn to practice again. Press pause and try 2.1.3 and write a mutator method. You will see here that it says that you are receiving a Boolean value, so that would be my parameter, and that is used to set the navigational status attribute. So here is my signature for my mutator method. Remember, mutators are always procedures, and this one is receiving a value in its parameter. But they don't always have to have parameters, as can be seen in some other papers that you do. So this procedure simply is setting the value of F navigational status, the field, to the value received as the parameter. So the right gives the value to the left. Remember, your mutator methods look very similar to your constructors, where the fields are on the left and the parameters are on the right. So this question here is a little bit more involved. Press pause and try question 2.1.4 yourself. So first we need to see, is this a function or a procedure? And I see that the word return a description is in the wording of the question paper, so therefore it would be a function. And here is the description, so it will be a string data type. I don't see it mentioning receiving any values. So the values we're going to use here would be my fields of my class. So the moment you see a little table like this with 3 options or maybe bullet points, then it is a clear indication that you will either use a case or a nested if statement. Now I'm going to use a case statement since my distance is integer, but you can also use a nested if. If you are using a nested if, make sure that you are going in chronological order. Don't start in the middle and jump up and down. Start at the lowest one and move your way up to the highest one. So my function just has a string data type, and in my case statement here I am placing the value of if distance to determine that first column in the paper. So the first one says less than 80 and distance is an integer. That's why I can use it with a case statement. So here I am measuring from 0 to 79, and that is my option here. If the distance is the value from 0 to 79, then my result of this function is clearly visible. If the distance is a value from 80 to 900, and read carefully, it did say inclusive, so that means including 80 and 900, then I further have to test the magnitude. If the magnitude was less than 2, then the result would be hardly visible to the naked eye. And if the magnitude was more than 2, it meant that it was visible by means of standard optical aid. Now just to note here, this begin and end is not needed because the if statement is one long line of code. Delphi does not need that begin and end here, but just as a reminder, you could have a begin and end for one of your options in a case statement. They don't share begins and ends. Each one will have its own after the colon. And the last option here was anything above 900. And since I can't use the option in my case statement greater than 900, that will fall into my else. And then I will return this result. But here is also a nested if to see how we can use the nested if to do the same question. So the first if here I'm starting at the top range is less than 80, so that means the value from 0 to 79. Then in my else, I have my nested if, and this if distance here will test now if the value is from 80 to 900. Remember, anything below 80, this will be the result, and the rest of this if statement will be ignored. Anything in the else will be ignored if the value of if distance is a value from 0 to 79. So therefore, I don't need a second condition in this nested if, because once this line of code is executed, the value will be 80 or more. So inside of this if statement to test for 80 to 900, I then test for the magnitude with its 2 results, and if it's not less than 80 or less than 900, it must be greater than 900. So I actually don't need an if here at the end. And in the else of the nested if statement, I just place that result. And finally, we have to write the code for the toString to return the attributes of the class in a certain format. Remember that these little brackets here really indicates the attributes that you need to use, and sometimes even functions that you have used or created inside of this class. So make sure that you have an empty line here and there and there. They are not there for nothing. They actually needed you to create these empty lines. For the last 2 lines here, you're only going to see one or the other, depending on the navigational star status, which is one of your attributes, and it is Boolean. So you will need an if statement in here. So my toStrings are always public, and they're functions, and they always have a string data type. And I'm going to start off my result with the first line, using the name and then the hard code in between the constellation, and then the #10 to create an enter, and then a #10 to create that empty line. You can also put a plus in between, and you can also use #13. From now on, I'm going to build a string with my result. So I take what is in the first part of the result. It will go in there and I add on to it. Just before we continue with the toString, I often go to question 3.2. This is now 2.2 because this is an older paper. In yours it will be question 3.2, and I have a look at where the toString is called, especially when I want to see how many decimal places I want to show. So if you have a look at this string here, I am just displaying 2 decimal places using floater string f, as well as then the distance. Again, the enter and the empty line. And now I need to use my f navigational status to determine whether it is a navigational star or a passive star. Remember now, an if statement will by default check Boolean values for true, but you can also add equals to true there. And if the status is true, I'm going to display the attribute fName and say it's a navigational star, else I'm going to add that it is a passive star. Thank you, grade 12s, for watching Dandelion Delphi tutorials. In our next lesson, we'll have a look at how we implement the object class. For more information and rules about OOP, go to my book 3. Hope to see you soon.